This story is for everyone. The Dictionary of Deceit. The grandfather clock ticked sedately and the pendulum swung. The Baron, sitting motionless, listened and watched. The steady ticking matching, as it always seemed to, the Baron's mood. From the early fidgets in his cot, through the tortures of adolescence, the tensions of inexperienced manhood, the anxieties of marriage, the triumphs and troughs of career, the grandfather clock had been a constant, reliable rhythm in the background of the Baron's life. Whilst the timing never varied, always efficiently accurate, the ticking seemed to communicate with the Baron, sometimes majestic, sometimes lively, or, when he was in the depths of depression, the clicks would become ponderous and slow, almost as if the clock was part of the Baron, an ever-present reassurance and as regular and in step with the Baron's own heartbeat. But today, in the library of his chateau, the timepiece had an edge to its voice, an echo that the Baron could only describe as ominous. Each tick hung menacingly, an audio comma punctuating a tense atmosphere. A trace of perspiration beaded his brow, evidence to the familiar surge of pressure building, both within himself and those in the library around him. His prisoner, rammed in a seat across the square of the Baron's priceless Persian carpet, his shoulders secured by the ham-like hands of two of his resistance comrades, stared back steadily, impassionate and waiting. The required decision was a simple one, but being without the excuses of the variables that accompanied a more complicated problem was proving extremely difficult to achieve. It was not only a question of proof, but also the monumental decision of a matter of life or death. Was the young man in the seat opposite, who had been found dressed in an RAF uniform, stumbling in the woods on his estate that morning, an RAF pilot, or was he a spy, planted to infiltrate the Baron's resistance network? The Spitfire still lay tangled in his wheat field, and the pilot's clothing, down to the Marks and Spencer's labels on his underwear, the Mars bar in his pocket, and coupled with his impeccable English, was easy evidence that his prisoner was exactly what he appeared to be, a downed British fighter pilot, the result of the dogfight he had witnessed from his bedroom window the night before. But the fate of other resistance units and the families of the fighters executed after the infiltration of Nazi spies posing as escaping prisoners teetered the balance of the consequence in the Baron's mind between acceptance and doubt. 2 hours of intensive questioning of the young man had brought the Baron to a conclusion he had no hesitation in accepting. He was not qualified to make a decision on the young man's fate. Just 3 years of classroom English and only 2 trips to London before the war left his halting, hesitant stuttering far behind the confident, polished phrases of his prisoner. He needed help, and fast. Wars do not wait for waverers. This man must be moved on quickly or dealt with immediately. The resistance could not and did not take prisoners. The Baron looked down at his desktop, noting the clock's pace appeared to have slowed even further, the ticks weighing heavily in the room, increasing the depth of doubt. The clock was pondering on the problem in sympathy with its owner, and sharing the weight of the impending decision. The pilot had been cool and assured throughout, confidently answering questions and then falling silent, and that disturbed the Baron. If this man were indeed a comrade in arms, surely he would exhibit relief at falling into friendly hands, or would show some of emotion at the hope of an early return to his squadron to continue the fight. Should there not be a backslapping, the shaking of hands, the opening of a bottle, and the atmosphere of relief in the room, instead of this oppressive weight that pressed upon his shoulders? But the young man was emotionless, sitting unmoving, primed for the next question, with an expression on his face that needed only a pack of cards, a green baize table, a low-slung lamp to complete the scene of a tense game of poker. That could indicate he was in fact a well-trained spy who knew he had won the language battle. The Baron's fingers tickled his upper lip as he allowed his relentless logic to continue. Or perhaps the pilot suspected the Baron was a Nazi, who was trying to lull him into a sense of well-being in the hope of extracting information. The problem, the Baron decided, could not be more difficult. He scoured his memory for an acquaintance he might call upon for help. But in wartime France, the Gestapo had ears everywhere, and even if a citizen could speak English, they would be a fool to admit it. With a discreet tap on the library door and an edgy cough, Angelina, his housekeeper, fluttered in. Making a wide excursion round the prisoner, with her eyebrows nervously twitching, she approached the Baron's desk without taking her eyes off the figure in the chair. Placing her back to the prisoner, she leaned across and whispered close to the Baron's face. The Baron's annoyance at the interruption quickly subsided. It was an obvious and necessary request from the kitchen. Angelina completed a circuit of the prisoner by leaving the room in a wide sweep on the other side, her body language expressing her dissatisfaction with the Baron's indecisive reply that the visitor may or not be available for lunch, and the cook would be informed shortly. The Baron frowned. The ticking of the clock was now irritating him. It was penetrating his thoughts, quickening them, spinning them in circles, urging him, hurrying him towards a decision. He looked around his book-covered walls, avoiding a glance at the fresh face opposite. His prisoner, the Baron mused, could not be much more than 20, and could have seen nothing of life. What awful luck! He was now just the Baron's word away from a bullet in the head. Or was he? Not wishing to look at someone he may have to have shot, he forced his gaze to wander away from the tense trio in the centre of the room to the high, calming, book-covered walls of his library. On the fourth row, a quarter of the way along, on the left, a book stood proud of its peers. Thankful for an excuse to break away from the stalemate and the cacophony of doubt pulsing around his head, the Baron stood up and moved towards the book. With a finger resting on the leather spine, the Baron paused before pushing the book into its anonymity of the row. Could his finger be underlining the answer to his problem? His gaze flitted between the book and the prisoner. Was the clock ticking a little quicker? But even as he carried the dictionary to his desk, his small pulse of hope began to weaken. He realized that the hoping to find obscure English words and hurl them at the man hoping to trap him was continuing his unworthy interrogation. He had no doubt the pilot would be word perfect, and to his annoyance the Baron could not remember any obscure English words. To him nowadays, all English words were obscure. He slowly, very slowly, opened the dictionary in what he considered to be a threatening manner, but a glance through his bushy eyebrows revealed his attempt to worry his prisoner was having no apparent effect. He needed a twist, some ruse, a trap to establish whether he had a pilot or a prisoner. Individual words sprang out of the pages at him as he unenthusiastically, and he considered pointlessly, turned the pages. He arrived at the letter M. The MAs suggested nothing, neither the MEs or the MIs. He turned another page, and then he almost bounced in his seat. A word exploded, enveloping, almost grabbing him, firing his imagination with possibilities. Was he, or was it the dictionary vibrating with delight? And now the clock seemed suddenly to be ticking with excitement. The answer was there. The dictionary had done its work. It had prompted a word that would solve the problem. Mamoon? The Baron asked. The clock whirred and chimed the quarter hour. The pilot's reply was faultless, accurate, and instant. The Baron smiled and snapped the dictionary shut. He would now sit easily at lunch, and yes, he would open a bottle of his best Chablis to celebrate. The prisoner screamed Nazi obscenities as he was hauled away to his execution. The Baron replaced the dictionary, but left it a little proud as before, as a reminder of his small triumph. He chuckled as he stood up. Mamoon was a word, German slang, which would never appear in either an English or a German dictionary. It was a term of endearment used by German children for the family nanny, and certainly a word that would be completely unknown to a British fighter pilot. But not to a French baron. 60 years earlier, he had had a German nanny, and had used the word regularly, as he was now convinced had the screaming spy whose career was about to go bang. The dictionary, the Baron decided, was a most unusual book, and possibly the only textbook to inform of not only words that existed, but by their absence also of words that did not exist. It was a literary double-barreled gun that had shot his pilot prisoner down. Leaving the library for the dining room, the Baron smiled happily towards his friend sitting in the corner that was now offering a contented ticking. He paused and blinked a look back from the doorway. Was the grandfather's clock's tall, narrow chest not swelling just a little?